Windows Defender. In this nugget, we're taking a look at Windows Defender. We're going to see how Windows Defender functions and how it protects you from various threats such as malicious software or internet threats. We'll also take a look at basic configuration of Windows Defender, and it's a pretty simple tool and very easy to use. And then we'll also take a look at some basic troubleshooting items, although most of the troubleshooting, like other troubleshooting items, is mostly in configuring something properly in the first place. But we'll also take a look at where the events are logged so that you can know if something is going wrong. I don't know what it was like in your experience growing up, but I remember for me, we didn't have anywhere near the safety precautions that kids get to enjoy today. For example, I remember when we were little, we had toys, like little tin soldiers and stuff like that. Yes, I'm really old. And they were covered in lead paint. Guess that goes a long ways to explaining my mentality these days. But anyway, nowadays you can't buy toys that have lead in them anymore. Or, well, actually, I guess you can if you buy them from certain countries, which is a little bit of a thing in the news, but you shouldn't be able to. Also, I remember I had a neighbor friend of mine that I used to jump on their trampoline all the time, and it was a great bit of fun. But one day I got a little off balance, and I put both my legs through the springs that surround the trampoline and had a little bit of a unfortunate circumstance as a result of this. We don't need to go into any great detail, but fortunately, we have even better protections there nowadays than we used to. For example, I just bought my kids this trampoline. I just bought it today, in fact, and it has mesh around it instead of these springs that they used to have, so you can't stick your feet through there and have a bad thing happen. I also bought them this little kind of netting that goes all the way around it so they can't jump right off of the thing and land on, a concrete driveway or something like that. So we've got all kinds of precautions now, and it's kind of like that with the internet too. Remember when the internet first came out, there was no precautions of any kind. There was no safety measures, no safety software, very little in the way of antivirus software, and there certainly wasn't any anti-spyware product. Well, as the internet grew, a company called Giant Anti-Spyware came out with the anti-spyware product. It was the best one out there. That's why Microsoft bought it, and then they now bundle it with all of their current operating systems, and they've renamed it, if I can get to the right page here, they've renamed it Windows Defender. Well, this Windows Defender product that we get to enjoy now, it helps to protect us against all kinds of malware. And malware, of course, is a broad term that could address a lot of different kinds of threats, but it's normally going to be things like spyware, or it's going to be something like adware, those sorts of things that can do a number of things. Normally, they're going to be internet-based attacks, and they can often install through your browser. So it might be one of those things that installs a bunch of toolbars, like we saw in a previous nugget, that you don't really want to have. Well, Windows Defender, when it sees that something's trying to install a toolbar, for example, it'll warn you about that and say, hey, do you really want to install this toolbar? Or if you want to install a program that adds something to the startup of your computer, then it will also notify you of that. Now, it doesn't always stop at cold, but it'll just notify you of it, and then you can use Windows Defender at a later point in time if you want to reverse that change, rather than as a consumer on a user side of things, having to know where the run key is in the registry and how to modify the registry and make all these kinds of elaborate changes that normally only an IT staff person would have to know. And so that's basically really what Windows Defender does, is it identifies changes to your system. For example, in the registry, and as an example of that, we have the run key. I guess I forgot to close my little parentheses there. But as a quick example, let's just go ahead and take a look at the run key. Now, you do have to be an administrator to get to the registry editor, but you can type in regedit from a run or a command prompt or something like that, and press enter. And now I'm going to go ahead and go to the Windows registry system here. And the way we access it, and of course, it has a way of memorizing where you were the last time you were there, so I've got to kind of backtrack a little bit here. But if you go to HK Local Machine, Software, Microsoft, and then go down to Windows, and it's also in the bar down here in the status bar area, so if you get lost, you can just look down there to see where I am. Windows, and then we go to current version, and then down here we'll see the run key. And this is going to be everything that starts up just as if it was in the startup group of my computer. Now we're in the HK Local Machine section, so all of these things will load no matter who the user is. Well, that's one of the things that Windows Defender looks at. It looks at this key of the registry and certain others to see if some program has tried to add something additional in here. It could be some kind of a spyware program, or it could be something like a keystroke logger, which is designed to capture things like your keystrokes so that it can find out your passwords and things of this nature. Or it might not even be anything that destructive or that malicious. It might just be something annoying that you really don't want anymore. So that would cause some kinds of pop-ups to take place or something like this. Now, let me back out of this a little bit. Point out that there's the same kind of a key in HE current user software, Microsoft, Windows, and it's really the same location after this point. Windows, current version, and then we also, again, have a run key. And with this one, we can see here that I've just got my Dell Support Center, and I don't really use it, but that's this, I think it's this, well, it's one of these icons down here. There it is. This icon down there on my status bar area. Or I guess that's actually the feature tray area. But that's one of the things that loads, is it's the Dell Support Center. You know, I could probably do without that, and since I'm technically adept, I could just go here, right-click, choose Delete, and actually I really don't need it anymore, so I can just click on Yes. Now, of course, we get a warning in the registry editor, and I wouldn't want my users to do something like this, but if they have something like Windows Defender, it'll make it much easier, because Defender will get there instead of them, and they won't have to be able to have that kind of technical knowledge. Then, of course, there's also going to be the normal startup portion of the Start menu. So if you go to Start, All Programs, and Startup, you'll see here that you have some items that appear in your startup. And this would be something that, again, would just launch every time you log on to your computer. Now, in this case, for example, just in case you wonder what this magic disk is, I may have mentioned it before, but it allows me to connect to an ISO file locally or over the network, and it sees as if it were a local CD or DVD, and I like it quite a lot because it's very, very fast, and I get a lot better performance out of it than I would out of a physical CD or DVD. Plus, I don't have to install additional drive, so it's really pretty cool. But anyway, that's one of the things I do want in startup. So when Windows Defender notifies me about that one after I installed it, I said I wanted to go ahead and keep it, and I decided to permit that one to take place and to allow that. There's also things such as program installs that Windows Defender looks at during the normal, next finish of an installation. It might detect that something, again, is trying to install something like an additional toolbar. Maybe I like the product that I'm installing, I know it and I trust it, but a lot of things nowadays will also include, for example, the Google toolbar, which is also a pretty good toolbar if you have to have one. But it might include something that I don't really want. Those program installs are monitored, and we can keep track of those things. If anytime there's a service that is tampered with, or the startup of it is changed, for example, it can also identify that. There might be a malicious server that's been installed on your computer that you don't really want to have installed, or there might be a service that does something like monitors or operates your antivirus software. Well, if you have some kind of a malware threat that is able to somehow disable that, then you'll want to be notified of that, so you know that you're exposed at that point. So those services can be monitored. Any kind of drivers can also be monitored with it. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Windows Defender is not just for internet-based attacks, but that's pretty much where its biggest strength is, and where it's probably going to defend you against most attacks. And so it's pretty well integrated with Internet Explorer in determining the threats that might come through to your computer. Alright, well, enough talking. Let's go ahead and take a look at Windows Defender in action. Now, for example, here I've downloaded the Google Updater.exe file, and I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And this is what we can use to install the Google toolbar, which I actually use and like on many of my production computers. But we'll just see what Windows Defender does with this kind of thing. And we're seeing here that it's downloading the Google toolbar. I don't know if you can see this down in the tray area, but we got a question mark on top of Windows Defender there. It used to be a green checkbox, and now we all of a sudden have that question mark, and that relates to the fact that something's trying to make a change to our system here. And if I click on that, whoops, it went away there, but I can double-click on this at a later point in time to re-access it if I want to. And so now I can just say, run the Google toolbar, and up it comes, and you can see now I've got a new toolbar up here. And I'll go ahead and close that for the time being. Alright, so it says a system was made by a known application. That is an option that I have turned on. You, by default, will have that turned off, so that known applications that you've already installed and trust will not be detected by Windows Defender in quite as aggressive a fashion. So normally, this probably would not have raised any eyebrows with Windows Defender. But since I turned that on, I kind of guaranteed that I'd have something to show you here. But now I'll double-click on the Defender item, which also appears on the Start menu, and you'll find it right there on on the Start menu if you want. And here I could say I can choose whether I want the programs to operate or to deny or permit them to run on my computer. And by clicking on Review and Take Action, I can see that we have an auto start thing where it's something's now in the startup folder. Interesting to note there. If I want to know exactly what that is, I can see down here that the startup item is the Google Updater. Okay, so if I wanted to really keep up to date with Google and I like it, well, that'd be fine. The other thing we have here would be a new Google toolbar. Okay, and we can see that kind of in the description that we have right here as well. And I can say, no, I don't want the Google toolbar. I'm going to deny that. And I don't want the Google thing in my startup. So I'll deny that as well. And then I'll apply the actions. Notice that I do have to be an administrator to apply these actions. And I'll click on Continue. Now, you might initially be a little bit concerned about that and say, well, what if a user installs something that they shouldn't have? But they have to be an administrator to then reject it? Well, you got to kind of think about the logic of how that would happen. They also have to be an administrator to make system changes. So they wouldn't be able to really install it in the first place anyway in that case. Now, if I go back to my toolbar, we'll see that we still have the Google toolbar right there. Alright then, let's go ahead and take a look at Windows Defender in action by going to my home page here, which is just the default web page that Dell configured for my system here. And I'm going to go ahead and change that. So maybe I want to go ahead and change that to, what's a good website? A really cool website that everybody should be going to. How about cbtnuggets.com? Okay, so here I go to www.cbtnuggets.com. I say, hey, I like this so much, I'm going to change my home page, and I'll use this as my only home page now. And I'll click on Yes. And I kind of went quickly through that, but that's kind of a rudimentary interface item. Again, to change that, I just went to the little arrow down next to my home page icon and clicked the appropriate option. We could have also done the same thing through Tools and Internet Options. But anyway, I've now changed it. And I don't know if you saw it, but for a brief moment down there in the lower right, there was an item there that said that Windows Defender had detected changes. And now we also have a question mark over the top of the icon of it. So then I can go Review Items, and I'll review and take action. And we see that what was trying to go on here was it has a new home page. This was the original home page. Do I want to permit or deny that action? Of course, we'll click on Permit because all cool people allow cbtnuggets.com. And I'll click Apply Actions, and that's pretty much it. So, once that's been done now, let's see what happens. I could just do the reverse as well, and I could go to my Tools and my Internet Options and go back to using the default web page and click OK. Then here we'll again see this message from Windows Defender. If I click on the message while it's still up there, it takes me right to this interface item. Here we see again that it's trying to change the home page now, but this time I don't want that to happen. I want to stay with www.cbtnuggets.com, so I click Apply Actions and Continue on the User Account Control. And of course, we'll see now that if I open up the web browser again, it's going to stick with cbtnuggets.com because I used Windows Defender and leveraged its ability to detect changes on my system and prevented that change. Now then, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other configurable options within Windows Defender, which, as I mentioned earlier, is on your Start menu. You can see it right here at the top of the Start menu under Windows Defender. The home page is exactly where we are now. If we had scanned, and I have not done that yet, but every night, by default, it'll scan at 2 a.m. If it detected any problems, it would show them to me here. I can also perform a manual scan now, and if I click the down arrow, we'll see that I can do a quick or full scan or a custom scan, and you can see just a number of different ways of going with that. A quick scan would just scan the most obvious places for changes on my system. A full system scan would scan all files on my system, and then I could also scan selected drives and folders, and then you would of course just select, pick and choose whichever ones mattered to you there. Then once that's been done, you will then have some history. Now I've already got a little bit of history because I've been messing around with my toolbars and some other things even offline here, and we see that there was a change made in there in a HKey current user item. This is going to be the change to my home page. This is just the technical data about it. It's really just a registry hack that takes place when I change that, and we denied that change. And some other items that we see there as well. And then, to me, the most useful part of Windows Defender is in the Tools link. And we'll look at a few of these things, but under the Options here, this is where I determine when a scan takes place, and you can see the number of different types there. I actually like to go to a full system scan just to be safe, especially if I keep regular hours and I know that I'm never working on my computer at 2 a.m. And because it's not going to be obstructive that way, and it's not going to have an effect on any other task that I'm performing, because my only other task at that time is to sleep, so that's not going to be an issue for me. I can also check for updated definitions before scanning. Can't think of a good reason to clear that item. And I can also apply default actions to items detected during a scan. And here's where I define those default actions, and that's further on down in the list what we see right down here. By the way, let me go back to this one. Check for updated definitions. If you are in a corporation and you use Windows Server Update Services, you can configure it to automatically download and deploy to your clients Windows Defender updates. So that could be then controlled by both policy and WSUS. Also, much of what Windows Defender knows how to do is based upon kind of a blacklist that it downloads from Windows, from Microsoft up at the Windows Update site. And based on what it sees in the list, it can then take actions, whether it's known bad software, known malware, known spyware, that sort of thing. And for severe items, which are not even listed here because you can't change it, and then it's going to just remove it entirely. But you can also go to a default action of ignore or remove. Now, if you want to know what the default actions are, which is definition based that you can see here, then if you go to this link here, Understanding Windows Defender Alert Levels, this will tell you what will happen. And that's what I was mentioning earlier. Severe, it's just going to remove it. High, it's also just going to remove it. For some of the other less severe items, and then it's kind of a little bit more wishy-washy, gives you a little bit of flexibility in determining whether or not you want to remove it. And that's kind of what we saw just a moment ago when I decided to keep the change to my homepage. And so for this part, many of these things are going to be driven by an administrative decision or someone who has a little bit more technical knowledge, because they might not understand, the average user might not understand what medium, low, and all that kind of stuff is. So you might need to go in here for some users, and if they have a tendency to go to risky websites, you might just immediately go to remove for some of these things, and of course the definition is already going to remove it for high. But maybe even for medium then, you could just go down here to remove and take a little extra step of precaution there if you felt that you needed to do that. Also, you can use real-time protection. Oops, I got to go back to what I had on a default there. I'm using my thumb wheel right here on my mouse, and I'm trying to scroll down the page, and this happens sometimes. It actually is just changing the last thing I selected there, so I guess I better use this thing instead. It's kind of an annoyance. But anyway, here I can determine whether I want to use real-time protection or not. Normally, you want to do that. That way, and that's why, by the way, it was able to detect changes to my toolbar immediately, and changes to my home page immediately. Otherwise, it would have waited for its next scheduled scan, and then it would have detected that information. But I like to use the real time because it doesn't really take a lot in terms of system resources, and I can be immediately notified of any potential threats. And then the rest of these pretty well explain themselves in terms of the various options that you see. And then, oops, my page jumped again, and I'm changing my scrolls again. But anyway, down here we see choose if Windows Defender should notify you about software that has not been classified for risks. That has not yet been classified for risks. Because remember I told you there was a definition, kind of a whitelist, that Windows Defender has, as well as a blacklist, I guess would be a more accurate way to say that. But if it sees software that is not on its list at all quite yet, then it's going to go ahead and notify you just to be extra cautious if you check this box. Or changes made to your computer by software that is permitted to run. This is software that I've already let run at one time or another in the past, and I'm going to just select this checkbox to give it an additional level of precaution. And again, it's just elective. If you want to do it, you can. Here I also chose to only show the Windows Defender icon in the taskbar area. Notice that it's not there right now. But I only show it if I have an issue that pops up. Okay. I can also see in the notification area always if I want to, and that would just be another option for me if I want, and that way I can quickly and easily get to it simply by double-clicking on it instead of going access through the Start menu. And then as I scroll down here, we see some advanced options as well. Scan the contents of archived files and folders. And this is useful, and I usually leave it on. It's going to take a little longer to run the scans that way because it's just going to be more thorough. But as long as it's not going to cause a performance issue with someone who's really using the computer at that time, and I've scheduled it well, then we should be fine. Use heuristics. This is where there's not something that's necessarily in the blacklist, but the software that's running or the action that's attempting to take place just smells like a virus, or just smells like some kind of malware. Or maybe it's trying to add a bunch of toolbars to my browser and changing my start page and adding a bunch of things to the run key of the registry. Well, that would be heuristically relevant. That would be things that look or smell kind of like a virus. I could also create a restore point before applying actions. That way, if I go ahead and install something that I actually did want, but it turns out that Windows Defender removed it for some reason, then I could go back to my restore point and quickly and easily add it back in. Also, and this is something I've had to do on one of my machines, I'm a certified ethical hacker, so I've got all kinds of software in my little toolkit that could do a lot of damage. And so on my production machine, my other production machine, I added an entire location there that it does not scan, because otherwise it'll disable and remove all that stuff, and I don't really want that right now because I actually have to use those tools sometimes. For ethical purposes, of course. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we see that the administrator options is that we can use Windows Defender, and any user that uses this computer, whether or not they're an administrator, will be able to see notification messages whenever it detects a potential threat. Also, we can allow everyone to use Windows Defender, so that even if somebody does not have administrative rights, they can still scan items or scan the computer and so forth. And I normally don't see too much of an issue with leaving that one on either, but your company may have a difference of opinion on that particular item. So then I'll go ahead and save any changes that I might have wanted to make. For broad system changes, I'll still have to have a user account control. And then we'll see some other things here as well. Microsoft SpyNet, there's not really a whole lot to that, but we can join with a basic or an advanced membership. This is a free membership. By the way, there's other things down here too. You can also say you don't want to join Microsoft SpyNet. I'll summarize all these words in one way. This is simply going to take any risks that we've detected, and it's going to report them to Microsoft SpyNet so they can collect that information to determine whether they need to include something new in the next release of the update to Windows Defender. So if they get maybe 1,000 companies that have reported some kind of crazy toolbar that administrators have decided that they want to remove, then Microsoft will take a closer look at that item to determine whether that should be something that should be added in as a remove item by default or as a severe threat, for example. We also have quarantine items. I don't think I have any of those particular. I guess I do have a couple of them in here. And these are items that it's just unknown. Windows Defender is not going to allow these items to run, and I can either remove them from my computer or something like that if I want to, and I can just select a couple of these items and then remove all of them, or remove all of them if I want to here as well. So we see here what was going to happen is that if I know what this exact thing is, then I might change my mind and go ahead and allow it or something like that. Or if it's something like this one where I know it was just the Google Updater and I don't really want that either, then I can remove them or restore them as necessary. I'm just going to click on Remove All here just to kind of clear things out and go back to my tools. Then we also have Software Explorer. I guess I'll actually come back to that one in a moment. I like that quite a lot. And then there's our allowed items. And if I've got a specific item that I've decided to allow in the past, then it can still continue to apply here, and it will be listed. I don't really have anything to show you there right now. But if I decided later on that, oops, that was a mistake, that was a bad program, then I could then remove it from this list. And I just click on it similar to the way I did on the previous list, and then click Remove from List. Okay. And then going back to our Windows Defender website, I can just look for the latest security information online there. Not really a whole lot to that. One reason why you might want to use that is if you want to download updates to Windows Defender and you're not able to through conventional methods for some reason or another, then you can download individual updates from Windows Defender's website. Now, Software Explorer, to me, this is where all the magic happens. This is going to be very, very useful, not just for spyware things, but for general troubleshooting items as well here. For example, here's my magic disk item that I showed you about earlier. This gives me verbose information about that specific item. And if I realize that that's something that's not healthy for my computer, of course I can remove it or just temporarily disable it. That's another reason that it's useful. I might not want to completely remove it and then have to reinstall it sometime or fix it later on if I realized it wasn't as big a problem as I thought. Instead, I can temporarily disable it. Do you want to disable the application? Yes. And then the next time the computer starts up, then it will no longer allow that to run. When I realize that I want it back, of course, I just click on Enable again. So this just gives us pretty verbose information about what's starting up on our computer. But look, it gives us more than just that. Currently running programs. I like this a lot because there's a lot of things that kind of accumulate on a Windows machine over time, and you might not understand why it's running so slow, or there might be a specific application that's running in the background you weren't aware of. Well, if you look at this, then it's going to show you all the things that are running at the current point in time, and it's very, very useful there. By the way, dwm.exe, you might find that kind of interesting. What that does is if you run Windows Vista, then that's what gives you the live thumbnails and live previews and things like that, so that if I was playing a movie in Windows Media Player, and it wasn't in the foreground, but it did appear on the start the taskbar here, by hovering my mouse pointer over it, it would actually show that content in real time. Kind of novel and kind of cool, but it does use some memory. I've seen it use upwards of 50 megabytes worth of memory just to be able to cache those thumbnails and to cache any videos that I have running and so forth. But if it turned out that this was something that I didn't realize was running, wormvirus.exe or something like that, then I could immediately end that process. I can also go here and look at network connected programs, and I don't really have anything going on right now, but that's kind of useful because if I have maybe a keystroke logger or something like that, well, keystroke loggers need to report to some other location on the internet what web pages, or rather what passwords it was able to find out. So it has to upload that to somebody. So it might have a network connected item, or somebody might be trying to remote control my computer across the network, and I can again see network connections in that respect as well as Windsock service providers. And these are service providers, oops, I lost it. These are service providers that are necessary as part of the Windows operating system to establish connectivity with other services related to a Microsoft Windows network. So you can look in there to see if there's anything that looks suspicious or something that might be masquerading as a legitimate Windsock service, for example. Now, in terms of troubleshooting Windows Defender, here I've gone to my C drive, but your Windows directory, and there's my Windows directory here, and then I've gone to this item right here, the Windows Update log. This is not just for Windows Defender, it's for any Windows update, and it identifies anything that's been downloaded, when it was downloaded, whether or not the update was successful, and so forth. This is a little bit more forensic in nature, and you can see it's quite verbose. I'm just going on and on and on with this thing. So it's going to be probably more forensic in nature, and you might need to use this in conjunction with Microsoft technical support. But that's where the log is that will give you very detailed information about whether or not it was able to download that information or those updates. Now then, we have an event viewer under Computer Management, which you've seen me use before, and under the Windows log and the System Windows logs, here's where we're going to see Windows Defender items. So here we see that in this very first item, Windows Defender realized something was going on, and it's taken action. And if you want to see more detail about it, I don't really have much room to scan here, to scroll, but you can see that there's more information that we can get from it. In fact, I'll just double-click it to open it so we can see it a little bit better. And it just identifies who it was that determined that they needed to work with that software and what action they chose to do. Notice that was Event ID 3005. Event ID 3004 is the actual warning itself, where it prompts the user with whatever it is that they've made a decision to do. And, of course, then they would decide, and you'd generate Event ID 3005. So here we go. It just tells us what exactly it was that it detected. So in terms of troubleshooting, you can go through here to see if Windows Defender has been picking up on certain changes that have been made, and if not, it could be that some other person at one point or another in the past has made a determination to ignore certain applications or something like that in Windows Defender, and so that it's no longer scanning for those kinds of changes, or maybe they decided to ignore a file or a folder that you actually do want monitored, and so that in that case, once again, you would have to be able to access it. Alright, well that's about it for me today. Now I've got to go outside and assemble this gigantic trampoline that I bought for my kids. I wish there was some kind of a defense against doing that. But for our part, let's take a look at what we learned here today with Windows Defender. In this nugget, we took a look at Windows Defender, where we started off with just a basic description of some of the Windows Defender functions, so that you can know the kinds of things that it does. We also took a look at the simple configuration of Windows Defender, and much of the troubleshooting that you do for Windows Defender will be making sure that someone hasn't gone through and fiddled around with it and misconfigured Windows Defender. And then there are some specific troubleshooting items we looked at as well, mostly specifically relating to event logs or the text log that I showed you as well, so that you can identify whether or not the appropriate updates have been downloaded and installed, and whether or not Windows Defender has properly detected any changes to your system. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.